Hey, hello, Georg. Can you hear me?
Yes, hi Val, I can hear you well. How are you?
Not too bad, not too bad. How are you today?
I'm good, I'm good. I'm very happy that, I have the new background here for volume 62, so we are getting on track. Issue 3, the March issue, has just started. And also some of the things we discussed in the last interview have started. So we are now accepting letters. We have already 2 letters in review.
Oh, very
and
good.
we have the first planetary materials contribution in review. So things are working out pretty well right now.
Oh, I'm delighted to hear that. I'm delighted to hear that. Yeah, just a quick word before we start. The interview we did previously, it got a lot of positive responses and also some questions. And since COVID is still with us, we decided to continue with this format and address some of these questions in a little interview to share with the community. And this is why we have met again today. And I will ask a few of these questions to Georg now, the executive editor of the journal. And well, thanks for the update, Georg. I think it's great to hear that we have these new contributions in the new format and the new topical areas. So that really means we're starting off in a new direction with the journal. And this is, of course, building on the long tradition, but adding a few new components to kind of, broaden the scope, which is fantastic, I think. But are you ready for some of these questions that we got?
Sure, go right ahead. Yes.
Great. I mean, some of the questions were from experienced researchers, others were from early career researchers, and I will emphasize those from early career researchers because they have less experience, particularly with a journal like JPET, which traditionally takes very long papers. And one of the first questions I'm going to pose to you is indeed from an early career researcher. And the question is, what makes a good Journal of Petrology paper? What makes for a good paper in Journal of Petrology? Can you say a few words about that, Georg?
Yeah, I think thanks to our excellent editorial board with people who all have H indices above 25 and are really experienced in the work they are doing. And thanks to the rigorous review, I think probably most, if not all, papers in Journal of Petrology can be regarded as good papers. So once you're published there, you'll have a good paper. You can basically say that. I guess the question is probably more like what makes an outstanding paper?
I think that's an important aspect. Another aspect may be what, in your view, contributes to making a good JPET paper. What is the components that you would like to see in it? So the person who asked me said that there was a paper manuscript and the supervisor said, oh, that's not quite right for JPET, but the person wasn't quite sure about what the details were, and the supervisor seemingly hasn't explained it very well either. So here's a chance for us to explain what we like to see in a JPET paper. Maybe that's an aspect to address here.
Okay, so I guess take a good look at the instructions to author where the scope is well described about all the things that Journal of Petrology is publishing. And then what we really like to see, I guess, while we do publish papers that don't have any petrographic images of rocks and do publish just models, I think if you actually have a good description of your samples before you go into like the detailed geochemistry in terms of the petrology, that comes across quite well, I think. And I think if there's some arguments that you can make on basis of that petrography or petrology that can support some of the things that you say on basis of the geochemistry, then it's really worthwhile to put the petrography in. So, and if that is the case and you haven't got the petrography, you're almost certainly going to be asked to put the petrography in. That's just one aspect. I just want to get back to what makes a paper outstanding and possibly
Let me quickly jump in here, if you don't mind. I actually think this is pretty much what I thought as well. I think one strength of Journal of Petrology is that papers are often comprehensive. They don't have to be super long, but they're comprehensive. It's going from describing the rocks, even with field images. There's quite a number of papers who are strong on field components as well, on petrography, but then also going rather systematically through majors, traces, and coming then to isotopes and models and things like that. And I think this is personally, I think this is one of the strengths of Journal of Petrology, that the comprehensiveness of the papers allows them to have a rather long kind of lifespan out there in the citation world. So,
for sure, yes.
But yeah, no, I want you to kind of talk a little bit about outstanding papers as well, because we all like to write outstanding papers if we can. So your advice here would be very useful, I think.
Yes, so the kind of paper that I would typically select as editor's choice paper, they would be papers that are not just portraying things that we already know and in yet another area, you know, which may also be valuable in terms of there are areas that haven't been studied and we want to know what's going on there. And so this is a valuable contribution and can make a good paper. But an outstanding paper would be a paper that actually drives the community's knowledge and understanding forward in the generally outstanding big questions in petrology. Either that, or it applies new methods that can trigger other people to employ similar methods to make new discoveries. So I think these are the kind of two big things. Of course, oftentimes, as a PhD student, for example, you are entering a PhD project and you might not know what are the big outstanding questions. So little bit of luck is involved there, that your supervisors know what are the big outstanding questions. But already when you become a postdoc and maybe have a bit more opportunity to choose what kind of rocks you want to work on, then it really makes sense to be a bit strategic about, you know, what questions are you going to answer and what is the best field area to go to answer these big outstanding questions. And so you're making a bit of your own luck, if you want.
I kind of agree with you. I would perhaps offer another phrasing for the issue, and that is, I think if you can be of service to the community by providing a stepping stone towards a bigger solution, towards methodological advance, then I think your paper can be very, very successful. So I remember that my first JPET paper, I got a comment from the editor saying, if you do this or that change, this paper has the potential to be a really valuable long-term reference. And I didn't understand it in full at the time. I think I didn't understand it in full at the time, but I did the changes, and I was very happy in hindsight that I did. So sometimes, as you say, you have to rely on the experience of people who have published a few papers. But being of service, I think, is a strong component that will help to make a paper strong and give it a long life.
Yeah, and there's another point that I just came to my mind that really is important to make a good Journal of Petrology article. You should definitely try, even if you're doing a regional study, try to relate it to the global picture, you know? Like you may be studying one specific volcano or one specific metamorphic reaction, or one specific meteorite, but you know, relating your findings to the greater global picture and what other people have done in other areas or with other rocks, and how that regional piece of the puzzle kind of completes and expands our understanding more globally. That is also quite important.
It's funny that you say that, because I have this phrase that I sometimes share with my students when they want to work on certain things. Then I would say something like, oh, It's not so important to study the blah, blah, forgotten rock Pluton in Arctic Finland or so. It's about what is the process that you can describe that actually contributes to our fundamental understanding of Plutons in general, not only this particular one. So nothing against Finnish rocks, don't get me wrong, but it's very remote there. So and this is the
Greenland
point
is a great place too, and Antarctica is a great place too.
Absolutely. So. No, this is more about a remote place, and it's not about the remoteness of a place or the individuality of a place. It's more about the processes that we can describe, or what we can learn from this particular site and the processes that occurred there for the bigger questions out there. No, I'm fully in agreement with you on that one. That is, I think, very, very important. Great, then I would like to move on to the next question that we got. And the next question I have here is, what are the advantages for early career researchers to publish in Journal of Petrology? There's of course competition out there. There's quite a number of journals, and some people are very fond of impact factors. Other people are very critical of impact factors. And when it comes to impact factors, many journals come out, at least temporarily, with rather similar impact factors. So, but there's other aspects than that, I believe. And this is why I felt the question was quite good and quite relevant. So yes. What is good about publishing in JPET, particularly for early career researchers? Could you say a word about that?
Yes, of course. So I think, even though it may seem overwhelming at first, if you get like 3 or 4 reviews rather than just 2, like most most journals provide, it actually makes the paper much better, and it also provides the early career researcher with more ideas and more insights and more contacts within the experienced reviewer community, you know. Of course, if you publish Journal of Petrology papers, every time you submit a paper, you get 3 or 4 people who will be reading it. And so your name will become more and more known, and at a higher rate than when you publish in other journals. Okay. The other point is it actually makes the paper better because you get more input. And also it gives the editor a chance to kind of weigh in with a more diverse viewpoint from all these different reviewers. So I think all of this makes it very favorable, this journal. Of course, the editors are really really experienced, so they can help guide the early career researcher on how to actually address those reviewer comments as well, and which of these comments may be the most important, you know, so that helps. And I guess one other aspect is that given all the feedback of all these experienced researchers, the early career researcher will grow in their knowledge on what are the big topics that are of importance to the community. And so that's a really good experience in that regard. The other thing you mentioned are impact factors. So yes, so there are many different ways how to measure impact. And as we discussed during the last interview, the good thing about Journal of Petrology articles is their very long citation half-life. And so, as I said, your paper, once published, has a good chance to be cited for 2 or 3 generations, you know. So that's a real benefit. Well, what do you think?
I agree with you. I think these are 2 very important points. The first part of your answer relates actually to the previous question in a way. This is why I put the question there. I think a lot of people might be at first a bit overwhelmed with 3 or 4 reviews. 4 is not unusual, actually. I got 4 for my first JPET paper. And I was a bit, ooh, oh my God. But I mean, the reality is, this is actually what helps you to write a really good paper, because then you get these comments. If you add this component, you can actually create a reference work on this or that topic. And I, in hindsight, think this was really, really useful. Although I remember that I was sitting on this aeroplane coming back from AGU and reading through all the reviews, and oh, it was such a stressful flight. So, but it was worth it in the end. So there's always these downsides of kind of the extra work, but often extra work pays off. And here I see this as well. And then the half-life. I mean, there is older journals that might have impact factors of the same or mildly better or mildly less strong values in terms of the pure impact factor value. But the half-life is very, very important. And given that JPET is only just about, well, 60 years old, the half-life is actually a very strong factor here. So the papers last.
Yeah, sure. If you have a journal that is over 100 years old, you know, then the chance that you get citations on your paper cited in the 1950s is actually, or papers cited in the 1920s, you know, they still get citations. And because Journal of Petrology only started out in the 1960s, there are no earlier papers to cite. So having such a long citation half-life, which is essentially a quarter, almost, yeah, no, more than a quarter of the age of the journal itself, that is really outstanding. So it really ensures that you get a lot of citations and that your study has a very high impact.
And they keep coming. That's the point. I'm still very happy about some of the JPET papers I've been involved with, which are still producing citations many years after publication. With some of the other papers I've been involved in, I mean, they're a bit like a straw fire. They attract citations for a few years after the publication, but then you can really see that they die off. And the JPET papers often actually, they start a little slow, likely because people who write JPET papers need to put a lot of work in, but then they keep coming, and that is what I think is very strong. Great, then I shall move on to the next question. And this is the next question, given that there is often 3 to 4 reviews, some people seem concerned that some competitor or some person with whom they're not so friendly might actually get the paper to review. And the question here is, what can one do if one is worried about a certain individual reviewing one's paper? Is there an option?
Oh, yeah. Oh, sure. So all you need to do is when you select your preferred referees or references during the submission process, there's also a section where you can enter names that you of people who you don't want to be selected as reviewers. And most people don't use that, but in some ways it's not really necessary, because because we are getting 3 or 4 reviews. So if there are only 2 and one person who really dislikes your work or your thinking sinks the paper, then it's hard for the editor to go along with it. But we typically have 3 or 4. So even if one is very negative, you know, if the others agree, then it probably won't be necessary. But you have the opportunity to mention names of people who you would probably prefer not to review the paper. But having said that, again, I think the editors will make sure that your paper is being reviewed by a range of people with possibly a range of ideas or supporting different models, so that you know, your model is being addressed in a way that is not one-sided. So it would probably be unwise to list, say you're working on they had mafic intrusions, and there are like several different, completely different models out there. One stating it's a big magma tank that's fractionating, one stating that it's a sequence of sills, and then there may be other people who say that these are actually not magmatic but metamorphic complexes. You know, so if you are, say, a proponent of the big magma tank thing, and you can't just enter all the names of people who think that it's more like a sill environment, because you know, obviously that won't make a good paper.
I agree with you. No, I think that's very right. No, I think it's a good thing that JPET has the option of excluding certain individuals. But as your predecessor, March Wilson, once told me, you cannot list huge amounts of people. You can list the odd person where you think there might be a conflict of interest or there might be a competitive situation. But to kind of add a whole range of people would be inappropriate, I guess. And of course, the editor will take usually some of the recommended reviewers and also some other reviewers that the editor thinks are useful for assessing the story. So what I'm saying is, I don't think by excluding 2 people that you don't like, you get an easier ride. The function is not designed to make your life or the reviews lighter. It is designed to kind of avoid unpleasant conflicts. But
yes,
I think this is important to realize, that the editor will select some friendly reviewers that you recommend, but likely also some neutral people that you haven't recommended in order to create a balanced review.
And I remember when I was associate editor, I sometimes got like people who said, oh, I have conflicting interests with this or that person, and please don't send it to review to them. And so what I did then is I usually checked who this conflicting person co-published with, you know, and then potentially picked one of their co-authors, so that, you know, there may be a personal bias with this particular person or personal misunderstanding or conflict, but at least their kind of general model or paradigm would still probably be reflected in one of the reviewers, you know?
Yes, I see. So that a balanced review situation is created. And actually, the positive side about this is you do actually want to hear what your scientific opponents have to say. You do want to hear what the criticism is, to kind of shut your eyes and say, I don't want to hear about the criticism. That doesn't help. You need to actually prepare your case. If you have a conference talk and you get questions from the opposing side, you want to have thought about these questions. So I think it's rather good.
And it gives you actually better idea of their thinking, and it leads you to actually finding the evidence against their thinking,
you
which
can test it more rigorously. I agree. Yes.
Yeah. So
again, it's this initial step that might be a little uneasy in the stomach area, but it leads to more robust kind of work usually. That's what I agree with. Now we have some small questions left, if you don't mind. And there was one question about figure charges. One person, this was not an early career researcher, but for them it might be an issue, of course, as well. The question was, is there still figure charges for color figures for JPET? And some people don't necessarily have big funding behind them, and this is an issue for some people. Could you help us here?
The answer is just no, we don't. We don't have figure charges. We used to when the journal was still published in print, but now the journal is published electronically only, and so all color figures are just presented in color, and there are no charges.
That's right. So no charges for figures, and this is obviously kind of helpful for people without funding, as well as, of course, people with funding. It makes no difference. So, and then the last question I have here for you is, there is now a letter option, a letter format, and you referred to it at the beginning of our conversation. And there's also a recommendation that regular manuscripts should not exceed 12,000 words. 12,000 words is pretty long, but I mean, some JPEG papers have traditionally been quite mammoth pieces of work. They were almost little books. So one question I got from an experienced researcher was, so does JPEG not want to publish long papers anymore? Because obviously it had a reputation, or has a reputation, for an outlet that accepts these very comprehensive long-term studies. And I guess some people felt, oh, this might be a gap then in the publication landscape if they don't have that option anymore. How do you feel about that, Georg?
Well, we always had in the instructions to authors that the maximum limit is 12,000 words, but that authors could provide longer scripts if justified by the scientific argument presented, and they had to make this case. But most people actually didn't read these instructions to authors, so they didn't make the case. And we ended up with a lot of papers that had like between 12 and 18,000 words. And we just sent them out to review, and they could have been way more concise because the scientific argument certainly didn't merit the extended length in this case. And so what we just want to do is make sure that the authors write their comprehensive story in a concise enough manner that your typical paper would be under 12,000 words. Because having these extended long papers that are inconcisely written really is of no benefit to the author, because people won't read the paper, or less people will read the long paper. It's of no benefit to the editors, because they have to deal with very long papers and find reviewers who are willing to review them. It's not of no benefits to the reviewers. It makes more and more work, and it's in fact of very bad. It's very bad for the entire community, in fact, because it takes longer in review, and it also slows down the reviewers of papers that are shorter and concisely written. So you're doing a disservice to the community to just write an overly long paper without it being merited by the scientific argument. Okay.
I accept your point here.
So this is basically the upshot. Having said that, we still do accept papers that are 25,000 words. I mean, rarely we do, but we do. So you just want to make sure that you're writing in a concise manner. And if your scientific argument demands that you have more words, then you can make that point, and that will be fine. But
yes.
You know, I'm just passed on a paper that is addressing 5 models of subduction zone magmatism and trying to figure out which one is the right one. And, you know, just going through all the models probably is a lot of words, okay? But this paper is less than 12,000 words. So if you're working on something that involves more than 5 major models of subduction zone magmatism, then you're fully justified to write a very, very long paper. But, you know, if you're working on a little area,
in Finland, no, of course.
it's getting a bit harder to make that argument that more than 12,000 words is required, because it's so much more important than 5 different kinds of model of subduction.
Yes. I think my personal kind of way of phrasing it would be that it's a bit like movies. I mean, there's a certain attention span every reader has, and if the movie takes, I don't know, 6 hours and not much happens in the 6 hours, chances you will actually fast forward. While if it's 1.5 hours, but it's packed full with kind of activity and action, then these 1.5 hours become rather short, and relatively speaking, and you might enjoy the time kind of watching the movie really very much. So from that point of view, yes, you have to kind of find this balance. Obviously, just writing pages for the sake of writing pages is obviously not what people want to see, and nobody wants to read that either. There has to be content in these pages, and sometimes I agree with you, not always, of course, but sometimes people submit long papers because they haven't gone through the painful process of trimming your own work. While, of course, some other papers, like if you have a comprehensive study looking at a data set for a large area, or something like subduction zone, as you mentioned, a fundamental process that is using examples from different places or different model calculations, different types of things that have to be weighed against each other, then I would personally think I would be, as an editor, quite happy to see a longer paper, given it has the breadth and depth of the argument. Great.
It's a bit like a Star Wars movie then, or The Matrix, or The Lord of the Rings. You know?
Yes, the Lord of the Rings, that's right. I mean, you can have long kind of things, but there needs to be some action in there. So, and it needs to have a grand finale and all that. So. Okay, yes. Great. This was wonderful. Thank you for that. And if we get more questions in, or new questions after this interview, then maybe we'll have the opportunity to do another one. But hopefully our kind of readers and authors will appreciate the answers. And let me say thank you, Georg. And we will kind of release this hopefully in the next few days. And then we'll see what feedback we get from that. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Val. Yes, that was good. I'm always happy to answer questions. So
fantastic. That's great. Thank you, Georg. All the best. Bye-bye.
Yep. Bye-bye.